I know that this has happened to you. You're shooting this really cool video, maybe with all of your friends, and after you're done, you sit down to edit the video, but then you make an insane realization. None of this footage is actually usable. Having unstable, shaky footage is one of the worst things to realize when you're done shooting something. But it's also I just spit everywhere. But it's also the most avoidable. So in this video, I'm covering the top 3 ways of getting shots with your camera. I'm also gonna teach you when and how to use each method so you do not get super shaky footage by the time you're done with it. I'm gonna do that by starting off with the first method, going handheld. The way I'm gonna do this is first teach you exactly how you should hold and handle your camera, and then I'm gonna go through and teach you when you can use this practically so it makes sense in your short film. So let's get started right now. Going handheld is one of my favorite ways to shoot, whether it's freelance, whether it's for a short film or commercial, whatever it is. I personally love going handheld. I like the look that it gives. The first thing you're going to want to keep in mind when you're getting ready to get handheld footage is to have 3 points of contact between you and the camera. That could look like having 2 hands on the camera itself and then pushing it against your chest. That could look like holding onto a top handle and then this side and then putting it against your chest, or maybe even putting the camera against your eye and using the viewfinder as another point of contact. Yo, so I was editing this part of the video and I realized I could have said this part a little bit better. Having 3 points of contact between you and the camera can be good for if you're doing stationary panning and tilting shots. However, that is not a great way of keeping the camera steady when you're moving around. In that case, it is better to hold the camera further away from your body. When I was explaining this, I think I was focusing too much on that part, and then I forgot that naturally when you're making videos and stuff, you kind of push the camera away, and that is completely okay. Here's an example of when I was filming a really smooth shot, keeping the camera away from my chest, and as you can see, it looks perfectly fine. And if I did do that with the camera close to my chest, it would not have turned out anywhere that good. So that's just a little disclaimer on a little part that I messed up on, but hopefully that makes sense to you guys now. The other thing you're gonna wanna keep in mind as you're getting good camera footage is to bend your knees and keep yourself feeling light. Think about how funny it would look if you were to walk around holding your camera like that with completely straight legs. You've probably never seen somebody do that before, and that's because that really would not give you smooth footage. The idea is you bend your knees and that keeps you even more stable and light so you can move around quicker with much more fluent motion. Really, one of the biggest things I could tell you is remember to swivel those hips. Essentially, use different parts of your body to move yourself with the camera and keeping the camera almost as if it were a part of your body. That's a really good way of making sure the camera is very stable. If I were to like get down low and then slowly turn my body, that would look pretty smooth. So if the camera were attached to my body and I were to do the exact same thing, that would still look very smooth and the footage would look smooth because of that. Also, a very good way of thinking about this is walk around almost on the balls of your feet with your knees bent and your hips swiveling, but walk around like a ninja. This is equally important when you're using a gimbal, which I'll cover in just a few minutes, but this is honestly even more important when you're going handheld, because a gimbal will give you even more stability with that 3-axis stabilizer. However, if it's handheld, you really need to do everything you can to keep that footage straight and smooth. So walking around like a ninja, almost as if you're sneaking up at somebody, keeping your body low to the ground is a really good way to get smooth shots, and I think once you try this, you will instantly see a difference in how smooth your footage looks. I'm sure I've showed B-roll already of I'm sure I've showed B-roll already of what these 2 different methods look like, where you're walking around normal and then you're walking around lower to the ground, and I'm definitely sure that there's a difference between those 2 shots. The last thing you're gonna wanna do is make sure you don't take large stomping steps, take smaller purposeful steps. If you can do all of those things, then your handheld footage will get so much better. Okay, so now knowing when to go handheld for your shots. Think about this. Imagine if you're watching a movie and in the movie there is a scene, and this scene is a very intense conversation between 2 people, and there's a long shot that's just really up close to one of the main actor's face. Now imagine the camera is completely still, probably on a tripod, and there's no distraction whatsoever. All you're watching and listening to is the actor pouring his heart and soul out into this scene right here, and there's nothing distracting you away from what he's saying, because the camera is completely still. Now imagine the exact same scene, except this time the camera operator forgot his tripod when he went to go on set like a weirdo. So he decided to go handheld, and this is what the footage looks like. It's super, super shaky, and because of all that shakiness in this really intense scene, it just looks super, super distracting, and you almost can't pay attention to what the characters are saying because of how shaky the footage is. With all that being said, a great way to think about whether or not you need to go handheld is the handheld look that I'm about to get going to add something to the film, or is it going to take away and distract the viewer from what the movie or video is really about? Are you going to be able to pay attention to what the characters are saying or doing with all of this extra shake that you're about to give? Another example is if you're about to film a fight scene. Now, most of the fight scenes, I think pretty much actually 100% of all the fight scenes I've ever watched have been handheld, apart from a couple I did when I was first getting into filmmaking, but those don't count. If you think about it, there's probably a reason why all filmmakers go handheld for fight scenes, and I'm going to tell you what that reason is right now. Basically, if all of those fight scenes were shot on a tripod, then you would not feel like you're actually there with the character fighting. However, because of the handheld look and all of the shake, you feel as the person watching the film that you're almost there with the character fighting him or fighting alongside him. I literally noticed myself kind of like dodging around and stuff while I'm watching a movie because I feel like I'm actually there, and if I don't move, I'm gonna get punched. So a good way to look at it is basically if you're watching this film and you want the audience to feel almost as if they are the character in this moving scene, then having a shaky feel definitely helps with that. If you can think about all of those little things as you're getting ready to film handheld, then I think you'll be absolutely great to go when you're deciding for yourself whether or not you want to film handheld or with something more smooth. But now let's say that you're done filming this scene and you decided to go handheld and you get home and you're ready to edit, but it's way too shaky and you actually didn't have as much practice as you thought you had, and it's just not really that usable. There is one more thing you can do to make this footage more stable, and that is by going into Premiere Pro and using this feature called Warp Stabilizer. Essentially what this does is look at the image and it crops in a little bit, so it like zooms in and it stabilizes the footage where everything does not look as shaky. Now, if you have a Sony camera, you can get this app called Catalyst Browse, and essentially this app has a warp stabilizer in it, except this is actually a step better than warp stabilizer because Catalyst Browse uses the Sony camera, and the Sony cameras save the gyro data of the camera moving around, so essentially it knows its position in space at all times, meaning when you take that into Catalyst Browse has more to work with, so it doesn't have to crop in as much, and you can get a much better kind of warp stabilizer effect in Catalyst Browse. But unfortunately, I do have something to say that is not great towards Warp Stabilizer or Catalyst Browse. Basically, while this is great for stabilizing quick panning shots, it's not great for if you're doing long shots where you're moving around a bunch and changing the angles and all of that stuff. For those long shots, you're gonna want to use a gimbal because Warp Stabilizer messes up those shots and it can look kind of weird. So using a gimbal for those longer shots where it's more complex camera movements is a good idea. And actually, I'm gonna cover exactly how to use a gimbal for those types of shots in just a moment. But first, I'm gonna cover this other point. And that is the second method of getting footage by using a tripod. I just gestured up like you can see the tripod. You're on a tripod, I promise. Okay, so with tripods, the movement you're going to be getting is going to be lots of pans and tilts. And luckily, those are the most simple to do, so I really don't need to teach you exactly how to do that. The big question when you're using your tripod is essentially when to use your tripod. Before I tell you that though, I'm gonna give you a little tip for when you're gonna pan or tilt on your tripod. There's actually a dial on most tripods that essentially help you tighten or loosen how easy it is to pan and tilt. What this means is if you're doing a super slow pan, turn that dial down and then your pan will be much more smooth and controlled. Versus if you're doing a really quick pan, kind of like that scene in La La Land where the camera's going back and forth. If you're gonna get a shot like that, then you can loosen that dial itself and then you can do really quick pans. And it works the same for if you want to tilt as well. Okay, so now when to use a tripod to get static shots for your films. The best way to think about this is you should try to get static shots in your films when you as the director don't want the viewer to feel like they're obviously watching this character. Maybe you want the character to feel a little bit more alone, so you're gonna do wider shots and have the camera static. Another way of looking at it is you're trying to make the audience feel almost as if they're an invisible character in the same world as the main character. Kind of like you're there, but the characters don't know that you're there. Now, a lot of times when you're solo filmmaking, kind of like how I started out, you don't have an option and you have to use a tripod. So maybe a good thing you can do in those cases when you're trying to make a film is write your character around the idea that they are lonely and you need to use a tripod for that reason. Okay, so finally, the third method of getting shots on your camera, using a gimbal for your shots. Now, when I was just getting into filmmaking, I bought a gimbal way earlier on than I probably should have. And because of that fact, I used it for like one short film, and then to be honest, I neglected to use it for like years after that because I felt overwhelmed and I didn't really know how to use the gimbal, and I didn't feel like it was leveling up my shots. With that being said though, if you know how and when to use a gimbal, it can instantly level up your shots and the kind of shots that you get in your films, and even for commercial or just any kind of filmmaking work in general. Knowing how to use a gimbal means you can go from long shots like this, where you're walking through like a hallway or something and it looks very shaky. You can go through shots like that to shots like this, where you're walking through a hallway, but it's incredibly smooth, fluid motion. The truth is, it's not at all hard to use a gimbal. First of all, you need to know how to balance it, and then all there really is to it after that is basically using everything I taught you from how to go handheld and applying that to using your gimbal. So keeping yourself low to the ground, bending your knees, and walking like a ninja. To be perfectly honest, walking like a ninja is like 90% of using a gimbal really well. You can also change settings in your gimbal, maybe by using an app or even directly on your gimbal itself, to where you can adjust how quickly and how smoothly your gimbal pans and tilts and moves in general. You can change those settings depending on what kind of shot you want. Also, most gimbals have really fancy features that allow you to do kind of wacky, crazy things. So I really suggest that once you get a gimbal, watch a ton of YouTube videos on your gimbal, because I don't have time here to explain everything to know about a gimbal. So go through and watch a YouTube video specifically on the type of gimbal that you have, and that way you can learn everything there is to know about your gimbal, so that way you're not kind of making it up and figuring it out as you go. And in terms of when to use a gimbal, obviously long tracking shots are great, and to be honest, one of the only ways you can get those shots is by using a gimbal or a glide cam or something like that. However, gimbals are also great for just getting smooth shots around your character, walking around them in ways that you couldn't do smoothly handheld, as just another way of making you as the audience feel like you're really there with the character. Doing that handheld is just too shaky, and that reminds the audience, hey, we're watching a film, because why would the camera be shaking that much in this scene? Versus doing it on a gimbal, because the camera movement is so fluid, the audience doesn't even notice that, and that's why it works so well. And there you go, 3 methods of recording video and when to use them. Real quick before you click off, if you did watch to the end of this video, then you either really needed to learn how to use good camera movement, or maybe you needed to learn how to use good camera movement, but you also just enjoyed the video. If that's the case, then I really suggest that you watch either this award-winning short film I made last week about a frog that possesses somebody, or this video right here on how to capture great audio. They're both videos that I spent a long time working on, and if you enjoyed this video, then I think you really enjoyed that one. And if you watched those videos as well and you enjoyed them, then if you could subscribe, that would be fantastic. I don't know if you're a filmmaking YouTuber yourself. If you are, comment down below and I would love to check out your videos. But if you are, subscribing to me would mean the world. So thank you guys so much for watching to the end of this video, and God bless. Alright, that is it. I am done.